Ancient India was a glorious place in all aspects. There are written testaments of renowned people about how marvelous India along with its culture was. The understanding of the Indian people from the mundane to the most significant was immense. And one such aspect was the field of naval science. The English word navigation had been derived from the Sanskrit word navagati, meaning sea voyage. India has almost 5,000 years of navigational history, even dating back to the times of Indus Valley civilization. Seals found in the excavation sites depict boats and ships, indicating the prevalence of at least a crude shipbuilding technology. But in fact, this knowledge and understanding of shipbuilding goes back even longer than 5,000 years. There are records indicating that Agastya, one of the 7 venerated sages, was understood to have visited multiple continents by means of sea voyage. There are even excavations found in the Lothal region in Gujarat to prove active trading from the Lothal port to Egypt during 2450 BC to 2350 BC. For the past 30 centuries, India was the central commercial hub with most of the ancient Indian exports made to Roman and Egyptian empires. In South India, the Malabar coast was one such popular location for sea trade. There have also been mentioning of ships in ancient scriptures like Ramayana and Mahabharata. Such technologies were mentioned to have existed here in India since the Treta Yuga, moving on to Dwapara and finally re-emerged in Kali Yuga. During all these times, Indians were believed to have mastered the art of constructing ships that were faster, lighter, and could carry more weight than any average ship made by other nations. So how competent were the ancient Indians when it comes to the art of shipbuilding? In the Vriksha Ayurveda, there is a mentioning about the type of wood used while constructing a ship to serve specific purpose. If the wood is soft, tender, and has a natural tendency to stick, it's referred to as Brahmani. If the wood is light and strong but doesn't have such a good tendency to stick, it's referred to as Kshatriya. If the wood is light and strong but has no tendency to stick, it's referred to as Vaishya. If the wood is heavy and strong, it's referred to as Shudra. The famous Hindu ruler Bhoja, who was also a great scholar in the art of constructing ships, proclaimed that ships made with the wood of class Kshatriya would be far more comfortable and efficient than by using other types of wood, but also advised against using any kind of metal when constructing the ships, as metal would have obvious reactions with the magnetic rocks that were found occasionally on mountain sides, resulting in ships deviating from their course or even worse, crashing into land. Bhoja's famous book in Sanskrit called Yuktikalpataru details very deeply as to how ships could be specifically constructed based on the intent and purpose. Based on the size, names and shapes, ships were classified into 2 categories in general, namely Saumya and Vishesha. Saumya and Vishesha themselves are divided into multiple categories to suit different needs and purposes. Bhoja's book also describes the ideal ways to design a ship so as to give it the perfect outward look without having any trade-off on efficiency. Even the colors were assigned based on the number of sails. By the 7th century, when Muslims first invaded the country, the usage of big ships was prevalent in this nation. In the 13th century, when Marco Polo first arrived to India, he was marveled by the science that goes behind making these ships. There was a certain kind of sticky material which was being applied across the empty gaps between the wooden planks all over the ship to give it immense strength. These ships were capable to hold even 300 passengers with 2,000 bags of grains at a stretch. The upper portion of the ship was meant as a living space for the passengers. If the wooden material below the ship in contact with the water started to deteriorate, a new wooden layer would be attached to it. Provision was made to attach up to 6 layers before repair works would no longer be feasible. Famous Italian explorer Niccolo di Conti was mightily impressed with the Indian way of building ships, especially the huge ones. He found the Indian ships to be comparatively larger than the ones from Italy. The bottom portion of an Indian ship with multiple layers was strong enough to withstand even the toughest of storms. The most impressive work that Conti found to be was that the layers used to reinforce the exposed bottom did not allow even the slightest quantity of water to enter the ship. One of the many falsehoods propagated by the Britishers was that Vasco da Gama was the first person to discover sea route to India. Though Vasco da Gama visited India via sea route, it would not be accurate to give the credit to him. Vishnu Sridhar Vakankar, a widely renowned archaeologist, shed some well-needed light on this topic. During his expeditions in Spain, V.S. Wakankar stumbles upon the diary of Vasco da Gama, and the diary has clear mention of how the Portuguese traveler reached India. It details how Vasco da Gama reaches the island of Zanzibar and finds a ship 3 times bigger than his own. It was an Indian ship visiting the island to trade with the locals. The owner was a Gujarati businessman going by the name of Skanda. Having finished the trade, Skanda was to return to Cochin the following day and led the way for Vasco da Gama to the country of India. Whenever a foreigner visited India, they were left amazed at the superiority of the Indian vessels. Even till the 17th century, European ships had a maximum capacity to hold up to 600 tons, whereas certain ships in the Indian subcontinent had a capability to hold up to 1500 tons. Such magnificent vessels made all the heads in Europe turn towards the country of India and its immense knowledge. The heads all turned with the intent to forcefully include such ships into their naval arsenal, and with this agenda, these Europeans started to set up industries where highly skilled Indian shipwrights would work for them. Lieutenant Walker, who was an active commander in the British Army, wrote in his diary that the British ships needed repairs every 12 years, whereas the Indian ships last even longer than 50 years as they were made of fine quality teakwood. East India Company had a ship named Darya Daulat that lasts for 87 years without any repairs. French traveller Walter Salvins writes in his book Le Hindu in 1811 AD that Hindus were at the forefront in the art of shipbuilding, and even today they can teach a lesson or two to the Europeans. The British learnt a lot of things about shipbuilding from the Hindus. There was a very good blend of beauty and utility in Indian ships, and they are examples of Indian handicrafts and their patience. Between the years 1736 to 1863, in the factories of Mumbai, 300 huge ships were produced, majority of which were included in the British Royal Fleet. Of this, a ship able to carry 2,289 tons called Asia was prominent. Asia had 84 cannons included in it. Shipbuilding factories were set up in Hooghly, Sylhet, Chittagong and Dhaka regions of Bengal. As the Indian ships were highly efficient and cost less than the British ships, the British sea merchants were soon afraid of the gaining popularity of the Indian ships and began increasing the pressure on East India Company to forego the use of Indian ships. They were worried about their jobs and livelihood, even at the expense of better ships in their naval ranks. Dr. Taylor, who served in the British Army at the time, described something intriguing in his diary. Just the arrival of the Indian workers along with the raw materials at the docks of London was more frightening and terrifying to the local shipwrights and the businessmen than even the presence of enemy naval ships along the coast of River Thames. Soon, official inquiries began to take place, and Colonel Walker put forward the facts in solid numbers that Indian ship cost less to make, are stronger in quality, and if the British Navy starts incorporating only Indian ships, the overall expenditure would be significantly less and the benefits higher. British shipwrights and traders vehemently opposed this notion. They could not begin to fathom the idea of Indian workers dropping by in London and maybe eventually replace them. This would not only affect the British local traders and shipwrights but also reduce the power and fear of Britain in the eyes of other European countries. This spark of fear soon caught wind and evolved into a wildfire. British Parliament under the leadership of Sir Robert Peel set up a committee. Even though there were constant disagreements in the committee, a royal decree was passed in the year 1814. This legislation was a final nail in the coffin for the Indian shipbuilding industry. The decree meant that the entry of Indian-made ships into European ports was completely prohibited. This slow and systematic attempt to destabilize the indigenous shipbuilding industry meant that by the year 1863, all the Indian artisans were jobless and their skill and expertise were no longer required. Once the law was passed in 1863, Sir William Diego sarcastically commented that with the law in place, British Queen had eliminated the Indian Naval Queen. This branch of knowledge passed down from generation to generation in our country was successfully destroyed until we can only look back at some of the amazing feats of skill and craft known to our ancestors that managed to turn heads all across the world in awe and wonder.